Hi, my name is Martin Perhiniak. Welcome back to the digital art series here on PSD Touch Plus. In this episode, I'm going to talk about composition and setting up a Photoshop document properly, and to make sure that whenever you finish, the size of your artwork will be enough for the print size that you imagined. In this episode, I'm going to show you examples from other artists, digital artists, and I found these pictures on DeviantArt. In the first episode, I showed that website. It's a great website where you can also publish your work and wait for comments and see other artists' work as well. And I would like to show some great examples for composition, which is a huge topic. And it's really difficult to tell everything that you need to know about composition in one video tutorial. I just would like to wrap it up or tell you in a nutshell the most important things. But like anything else, we can say these are rules that you need to follow. It's not really true, because it's always good to break the rules as well. So it's good to know about the rules, because then you know how to compose your images. And if you want to break the rule, you can always intentionally do something different. It's good to know a keyboard shortcut here in Bridge. If you want to go to the review mode, you can press Command or Control on PC and A to select all, and then press Command B or Control B on PC to see this mode, the review mode, which is like a carousel where you can use the right and left arrows to switch between images. And I'm going to use this mode to show you these examples. And it's also great because I can also click in an image in the background, and then that will jump in front. Okay, so whenever I click on an image, I can quickly jump to that specific image. To create something amazing and a beautiful, stunning digital painting, I usually say that you need to achieve 3 essential things. Because we are working in 2 dimensions, we need to be able to communicate depth, size, and movement. So depth, size, and movement. I usually say that these are the 3 most essential things that can make your artwork fantastic. You don't necessarily need to concentrate always on these 3 subjects, but it's great if you can do all of them in the same painting. But I'll show you some examples and you will see what I mean. So for example, this image is a great example of capturing size or communicating size. Because as you can see, here on the left side, we have this guy who is standing in that gateway. And because we know this is a human, we can imagine, compared to his size, that this place is huge. So this whole place is just massive. So it's good to have something that you can compare to. And without this guy here in the foreground, it would be really difficult to tell the size of this whole place. So size is easily defined by something that the viewer can understand, like a human body. So that's a good size or good object that you can always relate to. The other thing is movement, which is again something that makes an image interesting and breaks out from a flat 2-dimensional piece of art. So movement, if you can capture somehow movement or a dynamic action, that can always make your image again really interesting. And you will be able to draw attention to your artwork. And last but not least, you also need to somehow show depth. And depth is, again, a really interesting thing. You can achieve depth by using depth of field, which is a bit like a photorealistic effect. Like here on the hands, you can see the hands are blurred, the fingers are blurred, and the face is really sharp. And then again, the background is blurred again. So it's a shallow depth of field, which can also be used to emphasize depth in your image. But you can also use perspective, which is another very useful way to communicate depth in your image, which again helps you to break out from 2 dimensions. So remember these three things that I mentioned: size, depth, and movement. If you start painting and you would like to find out what works best for your subject, a landscape, a portrait, or a panoramic format, you can choose any of them. It depends on your artwork. For example, this one is more like a square format, while this one is a very narrow portrait format. This is a landscape, more like a panoramic format, while this one is really a panoramic wide format. So it doesn't really matter what is the aspect ratio of your image if you compose everything in your image according to that aspect ratio. I tell you what I mean. There is a rule called the rule of thirds, which you can see in lots of examples. Let me just open the first one. So if I use the crop tool here in Photoshop and I make a crop on this image, you can see that the butterfly and the lady's eye is close to these intersection points. The hand is also on an intersection point. So with the crop tool, you can actually see the rule of thirds. So if you divide up the image or your canvas into 3 horizontal and vertical parts, then you can put all the important parts on these intersections. Let me show you another example. I open another image from Bridge. Again, I use the crop tool and I make a crop on this image. And you can see the girl's face is again on an intersection point here on the right. This composition is also based on the rule of thirds. So it follows the rule. Let me show you another example. Here again, if I use the crop tool, I make a crop, and you can see again the angel is not in the center of the image. It's a little bit closer to the left and to the bottom of the image. It's not exactly on the intersection point, but definitely it's not in the center. And even though this is not the brightest part of the image, but I suppose this is where the sun is at the moment, somewhere here, or the strongest light source in the image. And it's also very close to the third, so one of the lines here on the image. And also the horizon is close to the other line here on the bottom of the image. So again, this composition is also based on the rule of thirds, or you can see the rule of thirds in the composition. Again, another image, which also shows a great way to emphasize movement, which I was talking about previously. So you can see again, the motorbike is here on the left. So it's a perfect example of the rule of thirds. Also one of my favorite paintings. Again, you can see the focus point is definitely the knife and the face of the girl. So this is a great way to compose the image. And don't be afraid of white space. So like here in the background, if you don't fill in the whole canvas, that's not a problem. Actually, that's a great thing. So try to always keep parts of your canvas empty or nearly empty. That's what we usually call white space in graphic design, or negative space. It's better to call negative space. And that empty or sort of empty area will always help to define the important part of the image. So it's like balancing out the two. It doesn't have to be equal, it can be different. And as I said, sometimes you can break rules and have a huge negative space, or the opposite, have a very busy image. So it's up to you. It's just good to know about this as well. Let me just show you a couple of more examples for the rule of thirds. Again, the face is here on an intersection point. And once again, the shoulder is in the middle, but the lady is on the right. So definitely not in the center. A landscape matte painting. The most important part of the image is again close to the thirds. Also a good example that shows you it doesn't have to be exactly on the third. If it's close enough to it, it will still work. So it's a great composition. And of course, it's not just about the placement, it's also about lighting and colors. But now we're just talking about placement. And I would like to show you two examples where we have the most interesting part in the center. So here, as I said, sometimes you can break the rules. We have the most interesting part in the center of the image, but it still works. Mainly because the elements here in the foreground, we have this character here on the left, and we also have this big tree on the right. So it creates some kind of frame. And actually in this case, because there's a circle in the middle, and it's also composed in the center of the whole canvas, it helps the whole composition. And in this case, it's not a problem that it doesn't follow the rule of thirds. Another example, which is more like an exception, where again we have the main figure, the angel, in the center, but you should also know that symmetry is something that we really like to see. So symmetry can be also something that you can use, but if you use symmetry, it's good to place it in the center of the image then. We were talking about depth with this image. I show you an example of perspective, which we are going to talk about in another episode. But there is also another interesting thing which you can emphasize the depth. And in this image you can see it, it's a great example for that, how the colors of the icebergs change from the foreground to the background. The further they are, the less saturated they are, and also they get more foggy and blurred, and of course less detailed. This is also something that you can see on photographs. But let me show you another example here as well. Speed painting, but it shows this way of showing depth. So you can see the colors of the plants here in the foreground. They mix step by step even more together with the colors of the sky. And that's a great way to show depth, and something that we are going to also use in this series. And also another example. So see the foreground, and then you can tell that those mountains are the furthest away from us, mainly because of the colors. And the other way is the depth of field. This is a photograph, but it shows the depth of field, a shallow depth of field well. And it works with photographs, so it works with digital paintings as well. I'll just show you also a great digital painting, where we, again, here in the background, we see the depth of field. So it's blurred and the foreground is in focus. The background is really essential in this case to emphasize the whole space, even though most of the viewers are concentrating on the background in this case. I'm pretty sure of that. Also, I was talking about size, and size is again something that can be represented with a human figure or anything that we know the size of. So for example, on this image, we don't have a human figure, but we can still tell that this monster is huge because we can see these skulls here, and it's easy to tell that it's a human skull or some kind of humanoid skull, and compared to that size, this monster is massive. Also here on this image, we can see a human figure and we can see a giant in the background, and even though their size is not much different, because of the depth as well in the image, we can tell the giant is much further away, and that helps us to see the huge difference in size between the two characters. Also, another way to show size is to have something in the foreground and then something behind it, and usually if something is further away or behind an object, it should be smaller if it's the same size. But if it's larger, so the element in the background is larger, that emphasizes the size of that element. Then this is a great example again. So size, movement, and depth, once again, for me, usually are the most important things when I first make a sketch and think about composition. And last but not least, I would like to show you how to set up a document When you start sketching, you should have a smaller size document. The size of this document is easily, we can find it here in image size. So it's roughly around 2000 by 3000 pixels, which is still quite big. You don't necessarily need to start with this size. Sometimes I just start with 1000 by 1000 or something like that, depending on the aspect ratio. But roughly, this is the maximum that I usually start with. And I usually also use a resolution set to 240 or 300. I will come back and talk about this. But my final size for this artwork is this. So this is the final state, and in image size we can see that the size is much larger than the original size. So instead of 2 by 3000, now it's more like 6 by 7000 pixels. Sometimes I also change the aspect ratio on the way when I'm drawing. And with this image I can show you that if I want to print this out, this is the document size which can tell me the size of my print. But this size is based on the resolution. Now if you want to learn more about this topic, again I recommend to watch the Basics, Photoshop Basics series, where I talk more about image size and resolution. But for now I just want to show you, if I turn off resample image option and I change the resolution to 300, the size of the print will get smaller, but the print will be a better quality print because more pixels will be printed on an inch distance. Hence the measurement is pixel per inch for the resolution. But the reason why I usually start with a smaller pixel size is that because when you start sketching and adding base colors to your image, Photoshop can slow down if your original or start image size is too big. But once you have everything, the sketch and the blocks of colors all in place, then you can resize your image and start adding details like the hair. In this case, if I zoom closer, you can see the details on the hair or on the face. When you start drawing these details, for that you need the final size of the image. But even if you create an artwork and you would like to upsample it to make it even bigger, you can always draw over it again and again, and after every resize you can add even more details. But remember, the larger your size, your canvas size, probably the slower Photoshop will be. It's also good to know a preference. Under the preferences, if you go to performance, here you can change the cache levels, which can help you if you work with very large image sizes. And usually if I work with a big image size, I set the cache levels to 8. If you have a big document size but not many layers in that document, then this works the best. So that's when Photoshop works the best. And if you have the opposite, a smaller document size but with hundreds of layers, then you should have the opposite. Usually I keep it somewhere in the middle, cache levels, which is 4. That's the center. And I only change this if I start to feel something, and that something slows down Photoshop. You can also click on these buttons, big and flat or tall and thin. But I usually just simply set it to 8 or 1 or 4 in the middle. It's usually better if you change this option to click on OK and then go back, close Photoshop, save your artwork, close Photoshop, and then open your artwork again. So that's all what I wanted to show you in this episode. Next time we are going to talk about sketching. So we actually start drawing in Photoshop. So make sure you join me next time as well. Thanks a lot for your attention and see you soon.